Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a spline miter jig custom fit to the fence on your table saw. Let's get started. For this jig we'll be using 3/4 inch birch plywood. Now let's go to the table saw and get the dimensions of the fence for making the guide on the right side of the jig. Using a tape measure, ruler, or pair of calipers, measure the height of the fence. Now you need to rip a piece of plywood to the height of your fence and then cross cut it to 12 inches long. Take the strip that you just cut the height of the fence and label it Part A. Now measure the width of your fence. Take that measurement and add 3/4 inch. Once you've done that, cut a piece of plywood to that dimension by 12 inches long. Take this piece and label it Part B. The vertical part of your jig needs to be 12 inches by at least 8 inches tall. Once you've got that cut, mark out the center on the very bottom, which should be 6 inches. Next we need to place layout lines starting from the center point on your board going out towards the edges. Do this using a framing square, aligning its corner with your center line on the bottom of your board. Take a 45-degree angle and set the square's bottom edge to 45 degrees. Check both sides to ensure that your board has been cut squarely, and then using a pencil, trace out these lines. After you do this, mark your board as Part C. We now need to cut the two parts that will be applied to the face of your vertical part of your jig. These pieces will be the ledges that your box or whatever you're applying your spline miters to will rest in while making a pass over the blade. The dimensions for these pieces are going to be 12 inches in this dimension, and then the dimension that they stick off of the vertical piece is up to you. It all depends on what kind of things that you'll be commonly making. I'm going to cut mine to 7.5 inches. So the overall dimension is 12 inches by 7.5 inches for the jig that I'll be making. Once you've got your boards cut, label them both Part D. The next step is to cut a 45-degree angle on the bottom edges of the boards that will be touching the top of the table saw. I'm going to do this using a sliding miter saw. We now need to cut a piece of plywood measuring 4 inches by 12 inches long. This piece will be applied to the side of the jig, giving extra support to the ledges. Label this piece Part E. Now I'm going to go through a quick demonstration of how the jig is assembled. We have pieces A, B, C, 2 D's, and 1 E. Part A is applied to the side of the fence farthest from the blade. Part B is set on top of the fence overlapping Part A. Part C is applied vertically against the fence and against Part B. Both Parts D are applied at a 45-degree angle against Part C. The final part, Part E, is placed vertically against both Parts D, making a whole unit that can slide. Now it's time to take our 6 parts that we've cut out and assemble our spline miter jig. Before I assemble the jig, I want to go over a couple things. First is that you're going to need to be actually at the table saw to assemble the jig, because the majority of this jig is assembled directly on the fence. Second are the tools. You'll be needing a nail gun and glue, some clamps, and a square. The first part of assembly involves parts A, B, and C, where part A is placed on the side of the fence farthest from the blade. Part B is placed on top of the fence overlapping Part A. Part C is placed on the side of the fence closest to the blade, vertically against Part B. One little tip that I want to tell you about before we get started is a way to keep the glue off your fence. You can take a piece of wax paper taped down with masking tape and place it over your fence. This keeps the glue off the fence. So the first thing we need to do, once again, is take part A, place it against the fence, apply glue to its top edge. Then take part B, apply it to the top of the fence overlapping part A. Take glue and apply it to the edge of part B that will be making contact with part C. Place part C vertically against the side of the fence closest to the blade against part B. Taking some clamps, clamp parts A and C to the fence lightly. Make sure all parts are aligned properly. Now you need to take a nail gun and pin the parts together. Here, here, and here. And then through part C into part B in similar locations. Leave these parts clamped together long enough to dry. Once you've allowed enough time for your glue to dry, remove the clamps and make sure that the jig slides freely on the fence. Once everything's okay, it's now time to assemble the second part of the jig. The next step is to attach both parts D to the face of part C. The first thing you need to do is clamp down the part of the jig that you've already assembled with the side of face C that will be facing the blade facing up. Then take both parts D, apply glue to the lower edges, and then place them on part C, lining them up with the lines that you placed on part C with a framing square earlier. Once they're lined up, clamp them down. Recheck their alignment and then place your framing square on the inside, checking them for a 90-degree angle. Once they're properly aligned, take your nail gun and pin them from underneath part C. Now we're going to mount part E to parts D. The first thing we need to do is make a center point on part E using a ruler. This center point is where parts D meet at the table saw surface. Align this mark at that point. With glue applied to parts D where they meet with parts E, clamp it in place. Use a framing square to make sure that parts D are at 90 degrees. Now take a nail gun and pin it in place. To make sure that your jig slides smoothly over your table saw, flip it over and apply Johnson paste wax to the parts of the jig that will slide on the table saw. With the paste wax applied to the jig, it should slide smoothly across the surface of the table saw. I hope you enjoyed watching this video today in making a Spline Miter jig custom fit to your table saw. Make sure you watch part 2 where I'm going to cover cutting Spline Miter joints. Thanks for watching.